This is in response to Dr. Paul Krugman's article in the New York Times on Monday, May 4th, 2015, Race, Class, and Neglect. And Dr. Krugman starts off by first pointing out the atrocity that happened to Freddie Gray and the fact that is it an isolated incident? Will there be justice? Is it one thing? Is there anything good that can be brought out from this? One of the things that he mentioned is that yes, number one, that justice may prevail. And is this an isolated incident? No, this is not an isolated incident whatsoever. He goes on to talk about one thing that really needs to be talked about in reference to this is poverty in the United States, and not just black poverty in the United States. And what is the causes of it, and what can we do to help alleviate it? Can it be solved overnight? Absolutely not. But can we make strategic strides in moving out of that persistent cycle of poverty that we have right now? And Dr. Krugman basically says yes, but he does go on to point out that, as I said, it's not uniquely a black thing in terms of poverty. We know that there are more people, there are many more white people on food stamps than there are black people. We also, there was another thing that we talked about in the concentrated area near where Freddie Gray lived, that the living, excuse me, that people died at a much earlier rate, at a much earlier time in the area near Freddie Gray than in many other areas of the United States. But this also is not uniquely black. Dr. Krugman points out that white women have mortality rates that have been increasing since the 1990s. Similar to what is happening to black people. And they're not in that concentrated area in the inner cities. They're in rural poverty areas. And what happens, and these mortality rates of women are also approaching third world country mortality rates. And why is this happening? And the big factor in all of this is that we just still have a tremendous amount of inequality in this country. And with that inequality, we have a tremendous lack of opportunity, a lack of opportunity of jobs, a lack of opportunity of, let's say, middle class wages, and that this opportunity is helping to create those, how would you say, increased mortality rates. Now, yes, there are things in terms of self-destructive behavior, but when you have no opportunity, when you feel you have no opportunity, that's when those self-destructive behaviors can kick in right about. Dr. Krugman points out, that the pundits have been basically talking about that people make bad choices, they don't have good morals. That's why people who are upper class are morally superior than those of the lower class, because they've made the correct choices, even though we know that's not even remotely coming close to being true. Now, Dr. Krugman brings out something very important in reference to all of this, and that is that there was someone who wrote, William Julius Wilson, indicated that wrote a long time ago, that when we as a country talk about the traditional black family and how it does not exist anymore, Mr. Wilson had pointed out many years ago that when we look at the decline in the traditional black family, we have to look first at the decline in the availability of jobs in the inner cities. And that is a huge fact. When did that start happening? In the 30s, in the 40s, in the 50s? That's when we saw the decline in the traditional black family. And what are the results of that? Much less marriage, increase in childbirth out of wedlock, as you would say, the cycle of poverty that keeps on going. But guess what? The same thing is happening with rural poverty areas, rural poverty areas that are mostly dominated by white people. That a lack of marriage, a lack of the traditional family, increase in out-of-wedlock births. And, you know, we had Paul Ryan over the weekend talking about the poverty trap, you know, that and basically his references is we can't keep throwing money at that. And of course he's referring to black people, but, you know, it's going to affect white people too. And, you know, this poverty trap, you know, I'm just going to say, this guy, Ryan, is a very despicable human being. You know, he gets this information from the Cato Institute, the American Enterprise Institute, the Heritage Foundation, who basically don't want to do anything to help out anyone that's poor, anyone that's in need. They come up with these snappy little slogans, such as the poverty trap, that sound really good, but it's gobbledygook because it doesn't address the issues. It doesn't address how we can address the issues. It just continues to blame poor people for being poor. And that's what Paul Ryan does. He's considered a policy wonk in the Republican Party, someone who's willing to take on the tough issues, but he doesn't take on the tough issues. He doesn't present anything that can help them. He says he has a concern. He says he's gone through a listening tour, going to a lot of these places where there is a lot of poverty and wants to come up with a solution. But his solution does never involve the government. His solution is something else, or nominal help by the government, because he doesn't believe in that. So his ideology dictates what the government can do to help out when we know that the government can do a lot more. Now, Dr. Krugman goes on to point out that in terms of what Paul Ryan talked about, the poverty trap and continuing to pour money in, and Paul Ryan indicated that we haven't seen any difference in terms of what the poverty rates have been. But Dr. Krugman points out, you know, that what we actually put into the poverty program, 1 to 2% of GDP, is a very small amount. And we are a wealthy country, and we can do more. And a lot of other countries do more, and they have much better results. And the thing is, do we want to keep having incidences like this happen with Freddie Gray and with many other poor people, both black and white, because they are trapped in that cycle of poverty, so to speak? Paraphrasing Paul Ryan. But at the same time, we have the capability, we have the resources to get out of it. We just do not have the will. You know, as I said, other countries spend more on this, they get better results, right? And the question is, are we willing to do what we know can be done, because it has been done in other areas, that we can address many of these issues, work on many of these issues, and see the results? Because right now, we're not seeing the results, but we really haven't made a true effort. You know, it sort of reminds me of after the end of the Civil War in 1865, that we had the carpetbaggers that went in, and then by the late 1870s, the whites in the South were rewriting the laws to exclude the blacks. And it was, you know, there wasn't going to be another Civil War. And then, of course, we had the Civil Rights Acts in the early 1960s, so we had that cycle go on for 100 years. Then we had the Civil Rights Act in the 1960s, and even though we thought that that would alleviate it, what we're seeing right now is continued not wanting to help out anyone who is poor, trying to write the laws so that people can't vote, trying to keep women down, decreasing the amount of money into Pell Grants. So it's the same thing all over again. And the question is, we have the resources. Do we have the will?